There is a famous line from the docudrama All the President's Men, which goes something like this.
Just follow the money.
This money. The five largest exporters of arms during the period, the USA, Russia, France, China, and Germany, accounted for over three-quarters or 76% of all arms exports. Now let's talk about the main arms exporters. US arms export accounted for China are getting more in news. You have North Korea doing more and more missile testing, America doing more and more training with South Korea, and present nuclear submarine deal with Australia, and the coming up of AUKUS, or the Australia, UK, US. Apparently, India's best friend is the second highest weapon supplier to our next door neighbor, China. And by the way, President Xi just had a very successful meeting with Mr. Putin. It also makes us wonder what Mr. Putin had to say to his good friend are the largest recipient of the French arms. The UK, Spain, South Korea and Israel were the other exporters in the top 10 list between 2013 to 17 and 2018-22 period. Arms exports by UK decreased by 35%, Spain by 4.4%. And for Israel, giving it a 2.4% share of the global total. Also, recent news has shown was India's largest supplier of arms in both 2017 and 22 period, but its share of total Indian arms import decreased from 64% to 45%. France displaced the US to become the second largest supplier to India. In contrast, Pakistan's arms import in 2002. No surprises there on why NATO and Ukraine is arming themselves. Something about the special military operation, I guess. Arms import by states in Middle East decreased by 8.8% in 2018 to 22 period. The top 3 arms importing states in the regions were Saudi Arabia, Qatar and Egypt, with USA again being the largest supplier. This means after a long time, Middle East is getting less armed. And the latest news out of there is that arch nemesis Saudi Arabia and Iran have signed a deal to restore aircraft since early 1990s. So you can see a clear trend here. The theater of war has moved from Middle East to Europe. Asia and Oceania are getting more armed, and there are new alliances forming. Russia, China, Iran on the one side,
There's nothing more expensive for an arms dealer than peace.
I'm Saurabh Kumar. Thanks for watching.